Hey folks, it's Coach Patrick here, Endurance Nation. Welcome to another coach lesson. This lesson, I'm going to be talking to you about the value of intermittent volume. This is a great lesson for both new and old members alike, as a chance for you to learn a little bit more about our overall philosophy. Before I dive into the slides and the details, I do want to point out that one of the ways that Endurance Nations helps age group athletes like yourself conquer the challenges that you face related to available time, available energy, available focus, financial challenges, logistical challenges, is that we get really sneaky and tricky with your training. And we use some methodologies that we've developed over the past 15 years to make sure that you're maximizing your performance in a schedule that still fits your daily life as best as we can for as long as we can. Right? I want your race day self to look back over the past couple of weeks and months and say, you know what, this is a fantastic year for me because I not only hit my fitness goals, but I did so without all of the corresponding problems that I've either had in the past or that I've heard about other people having and so on. And those would be, overuse, over injury, struggles at home or at work, just general overall fatigue, sometimes even what we would call athletic depression, where you're struggling through the workouts because you're not showing up fresh and ready to go. And intermittent volume is at the heart of that. Just like community is at the heart of the learning experience and your growth individually here as an athlete. You rely on your teammates. You want to make those things work. Similarly speaking, when we get strictly down to dealing with a discipline or multiple disciplines in your training and preparation for a race, we talk about volume and the relationship that volume has with regards to your fitness. And volume is a tool. It's not a destination. And in this course here, this little lesson I'm going to give you, I want to make sure you understand the role of volume across an endurance station season, and how you can not only take advantage of the information that we have, but begin to use it yourself strategically to make sure that you're making good decisions, staying on top of your training, and progressing across the course of the season to that level of success that you want to have by the time you get to your race. All right, fantastic. So give me a second here, and I am going to share my screen to the PDFs. Hold on a second. All right, there we go. I am fully shared, which is fantastic. And as always, this will be recorded and played back later on as we go. Okay, so here we go. Using intermittent volume to beat the endurance game. I don't normally start off with quotes, and I certainly don't normally start off with a quote from Queen, but I think this slide really sort of sums it up. Our athletes, you, your friends, your peers here on the team, we want it all, right? We want to be fast. We want to be strong. We want to be good at all the things. I want to, climb fast, descend fast, eat right, be skinny, be strong. I want to do all those things. And also, I'd like to do them as soon as possible, right? Because my A race is 8 months away, but I've got a B and a C race. And then also, I'm taking a trip, there'll be a bathing suit involved or whatever it is. And there's all these other elements that fit into it, right? So there's a compressed timeline that we live on under artificial, that is your season, but there's also that compressed like ego/desire timeline where people are seeking volume as sort of a status symbol. It's volume as the endurance lifestyle that you see out there on the socials, on the Instas, on the Facebooks, where people are, sort of promoting this, like, here I am riding up a mountain again, like, here I am another day off of work, here I go. And it's very appealing, but there's a lot that goes into that, right? So when you say, for example, I wish I could be that guy or that gal, like, they're awesome. They get to live this lifestyle. Like, if you want to take that part of them and that epic ride part of them, you got to take all the parts of them, right? You can't just pick and choose. You pick all the parts of them. There's a lot of negative stuff that comes with it as well. I'm not going to dive into the negative side of overtraining and heavy volume-based programs. The athletes who use them and are successful, very happy for them. But for us, you're here because you have constraints in your life, but you don't want to give up your goals. And that's especially something that Endurance Nation is particularly good at. And I want to walk you through some of that now, okay? So I mentioned this a little bit earlier, but just to recap a bit, our lives as athletes, as age groupers, lives in a world of constraints. And that sounds depressing. It sounds like you live inside a box or like a really confined space. And for those of you claustrophobic, please keep breathing. Don't worry about it, all right? But actually, constraints are awesome. I've never met a constraint I didn't like. Constraints give concrete boundaries to what's possible. And they allow us to make more focused and relevant decisions related to you. So for example, athletes show up and they say, coach, I really want to work you. This is what I want to do. However, I am all into coaching youth football, and Saturdays are awful. Like I'm offline. Tuesdays and Thursdays in the afternoon, I don't have time. And then Sundays, family time, I don't have time. So I really legitimately have 3 days during the week, Monday, Wednesday, Friday, and then Tuesday, Thursday for half a day I can train, but I want to do this big race. I know I'm doomed, but I thought I would just call you anyway. Awesome. I love it. That's awesome, right? Another example would be young athlete, typically male, who comes to me and says, coach, so proud. My wife is pregnant. We're going to have a baby. But I also realize that this is basically the end of my endurance career, because I'll never be able to go outside, and I'll never be strong again, and I'll never have fitness again. So can you help me just get through this year, because this is the end, right? I was that guy once. And similarly speaking, yes, there's amazing things that happen when you have a family and when there are other priorities in your life. However, simultaneous to that, not only is our heart always big enough for one more in the family, but also so is your schedule, so is your time. And the definition of how we navigate that space is through proper decision making. So all these constraints that I have listed here, are they challenges? Absolutely. Are they insurmountable? Heck no. Okay? Flat out, hands down, no. So your constraints. You may have some that you kind of offer yourself, but these are just some that I'm using, but I want you to know, not an issue, right? We have lots of options to kind of break through these constraints. And here are some of the more typical ones. People will often race their way into shape. So they'll have a baseline level of training, and then they'll schedule races along the way. If they're getting ready for, say, a long race, say they're going to do a 100-mile ultra, they might schedule like a half marathon in February and a marathon in March. And then they may do a 50K or another marathon that they go a little bit longer pre-post, warm up, warm down, to make that, 26 miler into a 36 miler or 40 mile. And then they kind of work their way across the season, and they can use those events as reasons to like taper, leave town, focus on the event itself and get it done, right? It's an example. Another option would be training camps, where people would say, I'm doing this big race, this new event for me. I'm doing Ultraman in Hawaii. I've never done such a significant event, nor in such an epic location. So I'm going to go to this training camp. I'm going to go out there. I'm going to spend 5 or 7 days. It's going to cost money. It's going to cost time, but I can adjust for it. And I'll go there and do this training camp, and not only up my experience, but I'll also up my fitness as well. So that's another option for people. Third option, certainly much easier on the budget here, is the big training days, which we have often recommended here inside the team. Well, we'll just block out time and we'll say, hey, 6 a.m. you're mine, and you start training, and we'll be done. By about 6 p.m. Give me 12 hours, all in. Between logistics and snacking and switching and working out, you'll get a plenty done in that day. That's a big training day, and that's a great investment. And it only comes every so often, so it's easy to block off time and say, hey, you know what, folks, Saturday I'm out, or take Friday off of work and be like, Friday, just pretend I'm not even here. Don't say that in front of your spouse, because they'll probably say something like, wait, you're ever here? Like, what are you talking about? But seriously, we can be smart and budget that time properly, right? And then finally, we also have another option here inside the team, which we call focus weeks. Instead of we take the big training day, we'll kind of blast it into a week. So we'll say, if you're really focused on ramping that run volume up, preparing for that ultra that I talked about, let's take this block, let's take these 7 days and see what we can do in 7 days for running, right? Having a 7-day or focus week block really forces you to kind of dial in all the elements, right? So for example, if we took a focus week and said, hey, every fourth weekend you ran long, right? So for you to get, 4 big runs in, that's a month, that's 4 weeks. And built into those weeks, because of the duration and the other work we're doing, there has to be sort of necessary recovery, et cetera. Well, if we compress that month, we squish it down and we say we got a week, we're not going to do all of that running in a week, but we're going to do a lot of running in a week. When we start putting back-to-back sessions together, we start playing with split sessions, we start talking about different paces, nutrition becomes critical, and you've got to get it dialed in. So this week is successful. So by leveraging time as a coach, I can create a compression of volume and learning and experience unparalleled out there that's going to prepare you for your event. And it doesn't mean that you're going to be out there every weekend for the next 5 months preparing for this one event. Instead, we can have normal weekends for 4 to 5 weekends in a row. And then we have a compressed event. And then 4 to 5 weekends in a row and a compressed event. And that's not only better for you, ultimately, I believe at the end of the day, as sort of a test of your fitness, a test of your skills, but it's also better overall for total you, life you, work you, social you, parent, family you, all of that really matters, okay? So by the end of this presentation, here are some of the things we're going to cover. My goal is just so that you understand better how to use intermittent volume based on your schedule, based on your season. Of course, if you have questions about your particular year, those of you on the team or coach level can reach out to me in your coach space and ask questions. Those of you on Plan or Tribe can certainly ask at any live event that I do, or Plan, you can ask in your FinalVersion inbox. I'll be happy to answer you there. The hard part about being prescriptive, and I'm not going to lie, a part of me really wanted to give you like a template, like here's a template for how you do it. But there's so many factors in there that I don't want someone to pick up a, an ultra running template to follow, but they've got, low run volume because of injury or COVID, right? Or someone to pick up like a triathlon one to follow as a blueprint, but they haven't been swimming for months. It's really more of a formative process. So I give you some guardrails at the end, which is close as I felt being so standard with my guidance to you. But if you do have questions specific with you, the general process would be to reach out to me. What I'm going to do is ask you to craft what you're thinking. So if you're thinking about a week, lay it out. If you're thinking about a day, lay it out. Tell me what you're thinking. I need to know where you're starting. Pen to paper, fingers to keyboard. Let's do it. And then I'll kind of go back and forth with you. We'll dial it in. We'll fit it into the part of the season that makes the most sense. Okay. Awesome. Okay. Very cool. So, and I'll intermittently call it, sorry, intermittently. Well, I did it. Intermittent volume, IV, that's what it means, just so you guys know as you're kind of dialed in. All right, so our mission here essentially, and what we've been doing inside Endurance Nation for years now, is cracking the volume code. Volume is a huge part of being a successful endurance athlete. And if we could all just train for forever, if our bodies could hold up, if our jobs didn't matter, if our families could put up with it, we would train all day long. It's actually, for those of you who have trained all day long for a period of time, no, it's not as awesome as it sounds. It's a lot of work. It's a lot of fatigue. There's a lot of like working out, but also a lot of napping and then eating and then napping again, right? So that feeling that you get, like if you're in bed, this has happened to me, so I'll just call myself out, where you're like reading the news. I usually catch up on the news at the end of the day, in bed, and you're laying in bed and you're just like, the phone is like falling and you're just kind of that feeling like all the time. Hey, you're a professional athlete. Awesome. Right? Except when you're jacked up on like caffeine or carbs or something like that. That's pretty much what it is. So when we crack the volume code, it's important to understand where the premise starts. So in this case, days build weeks, weeks build months, months build seasons, seasons builds peak performance. Okay, so you want to be your best. Being your best is a relative term, but being your true absolute best takes time. It takes building year after year, getting experience, building fitness, purchasing equipment, identifying opportunities. All of this goes into working down the path to creating a space where you can be super duper your best. Can you be your best this year? Sure, you can be the best version of you right now. Is that your best you? Probably not. Inside Endurance Nation, we have a 3-year plan that we work athletes through to be ultimately their best, is sort of a general roadmap. And that's what I would say sort of the minimum time frame to think about what it means to be your athletic best at the discipline that you've chosen. Okay. But in this case, the question we're asking tonight is, well, what if one of those days or one of those weeks actually counted more? What if we could say, instead of just having 7 days makes a week, what if we could have 5 days make a week? What if we could have 4 days make a week? What if we could have a week kind of count like a month? Well, what does that do, right? If we say a season is 9 months of a year of training with 3 months of relaxation, time off, fun training, adventure, whatever it is, your own version of activity. Well, that's 9 months, right? So you got 9 individual units. Well, if I can make one of those units count twice, then we're kind of getting 10 months into the year, right? Well, what does that mean, right? Where does that put us? And that's really exciting when we start thinking about what it means to kind of disrupt the system as it's been designed. One of the best ways to think about it, and hey, if I'm going to put Queen in here, there's no way I'm not going to put little Spinal Tap in here as well. Just like a shout out to Scott Gilgem with our Dial It Up to 11 ride. This one goes to 11. So we're going to turn things up a little bit, be a little unique, a little different than you might otherwise find. So as a baseline, let me also just talk a little bit about training stress. Those of you who are familiar with training peaks or perhaps training racing with a power meter have heard of Andrew Coggin and understand the work that he's done around quantifying training stress. And while not everyone agrees with threshold power, not everyone agrees with what training stress is, it's a useful concept. It's relatively standardized. And here it is, just so you have it as a baseline, especially for those of you who don't know. So training stress is essentially a model that normalizes your effort by sport, whatever your sports are or your sport is, multiple or 1, that gives us a sense of just how hard that workout is. It gives us a number. So if you run for an hour and I run for an hour, but I run really, really hard and you run really, really easy, we both cover 8 miles. We cover it in an hour. So we both ran the same time. We both ran the same distance. But for me, it was an all-out effort to get that time in. I was crushing myself. And for you, it was the easiest run you've ever done. It's hard to tell from the first 2 metrics because we have time, we're the same. And distance, we're the same. Elevation, we're the same. Twins, twins, twins. Hey, we're best friends. But then we take a look at the intensity of that workout and we decide that Coach Patrick worked really, really much harder than you, super you. And as a result, my training stress is higher. I had a higher percentage effort that scored more training stress points for me. Okay. So very important that you understand how that model works. I'm not saying it's perfect. That's the model we're going to use as the baseline since it's kind of standard in our space. And it's an opportunity for you to kind of engage with that. And there's not only Training Peaks has its own formula and information built into its system, but many other platforms have a comparable number, or they've leveraged training stress if they've licensed it from them. So you know more. Okay, all right. So just to break it down into numbers, basically the training stress model says that 1 hour at your threshold power, which is that sort of 20-minute or hour sustained power, and again, I don't want to get into debates about that. People have different feelings about that, as does Coggin. But the point being, we look at the math. It says that 1 hour at your threshold scores 100 points. So you can think about like taking a test. You have all the words, they're super complicated. You nail all the words, you work really hard to get all those words right spelled in your spelling test. You get 100, you've earned it. You don't really do any studying, you only get half of them right. Well, it's less, right? Similar with working out, if I do half my effort, it is less score. So if I do half my effort, if I do like 50% instead of 100% for an hour, I would only earn 50 TSS points. If I did 3/4 at 75%, then I earned 75 TSS points. Okay, so it's really helpful for us because what it allows us to do on some level, going to zoom out a little bit, it's not perfect, we can kind of normalize our effort. So for steady effort estimations, these are just numbers that I've developed over time that I use myself and that I kind of use to get a baseline understanding of our athletes, because everyone has different settings in Training Peaks and sometimes the numbers can be off. This Training Peaks and the training stress model really does depend on an accurate threshold power. So if you're not having actual threshold numbers, the number can become a little jacked, right? Okay, so my baseline normalizations are for 100 yards of swimming, it's about 1 TSS. So if I do a 4K swim, it's about 40 TSS, right? For an hour of cycling, steady, it's about 65 TSS, right? 65%, not quite Ironman pace, just a little bit low, but just steady riding. I'm not lollygagging. I still have to, pay attention, but I can still talk if I need to, but not long sentences, but enough, right? And then a 1 mile run works out to be about 10 TSS as well for an average pace. So these are all average numbers. If you go back and look at your numbers, say you go timeout, Coach Patrick, hit the space bar, I'm gonna pause this and go back and look at my numbers. Come back in 3 hours when you're doing crunching the numbers. You may say, no, Patrick, it's 8 TSS or maybe 12 TSS. These are just ballpark approximations so you can understand. When you start doing some math and you say, hey, I'm going to swim a half Ironman, which is, we know is, 20, whatever that is, 2,200 yards or something like that. You could say, oh, 2,200 yards, 22 of those, 22 TSS, right? And a half Ironman is going to take you, 3 hours because of your pace that you ride at, roughly 180, 195 TSS, somewhere in that range, right? You kind of get some ballpark numbers of those TSS metrics and values for you, okay? Now, when we think about training stress is a response to your intensity over time. But inside Endurance Nation, we leverage intensity to make your training count more. So I want to keep your week relatively fixed in terms of training time. That's what we do on Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday, Wednesday, Friday, Sunday. And I try and keep that the same. And the way that we keep it roughly the same, but increase the progressive overload from week to week to week, is that we leverage intensity. And we'll do more and more intensity or time and intensity as we go. So as we think about what it means to use intensity across the season, I thought this graph would be helpful. There's 3 specific areas. Your out season one, which goes from basically this is a cycling power model from 1 second out to 20 minutes. The mid-season model, which goes from about 5 minutes to about an hour. And the race prep, which runs from right around 20 minutes-ish out to an hour. This whole line should be kind of over a little bit more. Sorry about that. And so the net being that as we move across the season from early in the year to later in the year, we're using different versions of intensity to create stress. And the reason why we can get away with creating more training stress, even though we're choosing lower stress items, is a function because we're adding more time as we get closer to race. So if this was a time chart, this would almost be flipped because you'd be starting off lower time here and be increasing in time as we get closer to your race. So we get to kind of keep the overall intensity high, but the training intensity, but the overall distribution of the zones changes over time because we're getting more access to volume or less access to intensity as we go forward. But it's important for you to note as well, when we think about your power curve in particular, when I always talk about the out season being the most important time of the year, this chart gives you a great example. Why? Because 2/3, if not 3/4 of this chart, we go from 1 second out to 5 hours, is dedicated to time we spend in the out season. So that out season, those 14 weeks really, really, really matter because we're fundamentally changing the shape of this curve. And then eventually over time, the changes that we make here in this first block, this first set of parentheses here, will have a trickle-down effect across the rest of our year. It's important for you to kind of understand that. And I think this visual, really kind of captures what that looks like. So let's break down each block. So early season, a lot of our intensity is 90% and up, sometimes even up to 130% or higher, depending on what your goals are and what the focus of your plan is. But in general, we're using more time then. So when we think about what that means, how does more intensity benefit? So when we look at cycling, for example, we can say 1 hour of steady riding is 65 TSS. So that 3-hour ride that I mentioned, that half Ironman, that's 195 TSS at that level, assuming that it takes you 3 hours and you're keeping on that steady effort. You may choose a course that you're faster on. You may buy new equipment that makes you faster. You may, change your pacing due to conditions or whatever it may be, right? But in general, we'll do the math and say we'll normalize that for 3 hours at that rate. But remember, you get 100 TSS an hour if you're riding a threshold. So if we did 2 hours of roughly threshold level work, you'd earn your 200 TSS from this 3-hour steady ride. You could earn a 3-hour ride in 2 hours with a really hard ride. Okay, do you see the math there? So you can basically say, if I know the stress that I want to create, I can earn that stress in a more time efficient manner by using intensity. Now that works, however, you are robbing yourself of the time. That extra hour matters, that extra hour's work. I'm not saying that the 2 hours of time you spend earning that 3 hours of stress is easy, but it's not specific to what a 3-hour ride would look like, right? And so it's important to note that while we're earning the stress, the means through which we are earning that stress kind of changes the nature of the stress that we've earned a little bit, right? We're using different muscle fibers for a different duration. And so while we're earning the stress, it's not a one-to-one replacement, right? You can't say, hey, coach, I'm going to go do this Ironman. So it's going to be this many TSS, swim, bike, and run. And you say, I'm just going to train by doing half of everything, but doing it really hard. And so it'll be about the same. And I'll tell you, it's not going to work because riding for a long time takes a toll on your body. Nutrition's important. Same for the run. Starting the run with all that fatigue from a 5 or 6 hour bike ride is important. But if you're only riding 2.5 hours, you're never going to have the level of muscular and positional fatigue to set you up to learn how to run with that fatigue, right? So we can hack it, but it's not a one-to-one replacement. So I want to kind of put a pin in that in the back of your mind. Okay. All right. Now, when we get to mid-season, then we move to like sort of 80% up, right? So we don't go to the super high end. I probably would have called this like 80% to 100%, but sometimes people do go a little harder. In this space, we start working with more zone 3 or tempo type training, or our ABP rides, always be pushing. You can do tempo events. So people will do like a half marathon, which is kind of long tempo. Maybe they'll do a short course race if you're a triathlete, like a cyclocross race. Is an easy example, or like one of the shorter group rides you might do that's got like a 20-minute block, and you warm up for 20 minutes, 30 minutes neutral start, and then you do this 20-mile effort, kind of crush yourself for about an hour, and then go home. That's about right as well. And then also you may have some scattered intervals at this time, doing stuff to kind of maintain that high end, but certainly not pushing those numbers up anymore. And that's an important part of this mid-season period where we're trying to retain some of those gains. When we go back up to that power curve, these gains up here are not easily made. And once you've made them, we don't want them to die. So even though we're moving our focus downstream, we may do 1 or 2 sessions just to kind of keep these high numbers high, keep them relevant, right? So we have to do hard work all the time, but we do have to do hard work around the clock in terms of, I'm going to make sure to keep myself on track, keep the numbers in my training log as relevant as possible. Okay. And then when we get to late season, we go more race prep, and it's usually, depending on the duration of your event, 60 to 80%, but more on that in a later slide, okay? So I did want to talk to you a little bit about the volume piece, because there is some interesting information about volume and just some great science out there as well. Steven Seiler, who is originally from Texas, he's a rower. He's been in Norway for forever. I kind of coined the 80-20 rule after doing tons and tons of research on elite athletes, and realizing that kind of across the board, across sport almost, when you broke it down, the elites tended to spend about 80% of their time in zone 1, zone 2, and 20% of their training time in those higher zones. And the sort of the caveat here is that these are elite athletes, so they have more time, they have more flexibility, they've got the support. But the science is basically there that if you want to reach peak human potential at an endurance sport, being able to train for a long period of time and then also be able to work in intensity in incremental and intelligent doses matters, but the total time really matters. And so that's kind of what we're waging a war against. And I put the link here as well so you can kind of understand that quote a little bit as well. So as we think about making modifications for using intermittent volume, I want to keep that 80-20 rule in mind, because it kind of really shows what we're sort of up against in terms of not only what expectations are for volume, which is something that other people will look at. We'll try and figure out how to try to crack the code, but also what's best practices, right? So we know that more time does make a difference. If you don't have it, what's the best option, right? Which brings us to this intermittent volume option. And I've kind of broken it down for each section of the season here. So the out season is doing one long day every 4 weeks, every 4th week or 5th week, depending, do a long day. Go big on the bike, whatever it is, go big with do your regular bike, but add a nice long hike, midday, 3-day hike outside, or maybe, run, bike, run, whatever it may be, but we make that day challenging. Okay. And when we get to our specificity part of the season, which is usually bike focus, run focus, whatever it may be, we'll do a sport focus at a time for increased stress. So we'll do more cycling than running, or more running than cycling, or more swimming than cycling and running, whatever it may be, right? And our prep plan, some of you may use these, some of you may not. It's kind of the bridge between the main part of the season and the race prep part of the season. We've got to connect these dots. And that prep plan is a 4-week block, which you can repeat as needed. That sort of has a general progression. You'll see in a second, with that big week at the end. And then finally, race prep. And this is where race simulations or other events, or perhaps a late season training camp, may play a role, where you'll kind of get in with some really specific targeted volume. Okay. So the out season, here's a quick visual for you so you understand. So like in this case, I did it on the 5th because those are our tests and rest weeks. So 1, 2, 3, 4 test, 1, 2, 3, 4 test, and it should be 1, 2, 3 tests, because we have 14 weeks in the out season, not 15, but you get the general idea. And then, so basically we're doing a lot of high intensity here on these lower volume weeks, but on these bigger weeks, we're taking the intensity down. We just do a test or something short, and the rest of the time is spent on volume, particularly if we can do a bigger day. So for triathletes, it's mostly spending time on the bike. For runners, it would be a combination of like running and hiking, to kind of challenge it. We don't have the high-end fitness to be running long distances this early, but we can still spend time on our feet and create the adaptations we want through training stress, right? So this is an easy one to do, because you can look at your calendar and say week 5 Saturday is this day, and you can plan around that day, because it weeks in advance you can make something happen, which is helpful. Okay. The second piece, looking at specificity, which is that sport focus, and we'll dial in on, say, bike or run or whatever it may be for you, and spend more time there. So our basic training across these 6 weeks in our focus plan maintains levels of swim, blue, and run, green in this case. But on the bike, which is the red, we've raised it up, and we'll spend more time cycling. So this total time here is not different from previous week's time. The allocation of time, the pie chart has changed, because more time is now spent on the bike. And this is an opportunity for us to increase training performance and duration through intensity, as we draw that line out and go from that 20-minute to the 1-hour mark and use it accordingly. There's also a lot of competency that happens in this space by doing the sport on repeat days, back-to-back days, doing it when you're tired, doing it when you're fresh, doing it early, doing it later in the day, doing it midday. All of that kind of comes into play as we get smarter about managing our effort. And these focus periods are great times to do just that. Okay. The next place is the prep plan. What does that look like? The prep plan is unique in that it's kind of building up pretty solidly across the 4 weeks and finishing with that bigger 4th week. And in this case, these are sort of micro steps. You can imagine a relatively flat season across the out season in terms of total time. The specificity is not that different. At the same time, it's just allocations are different of work, right, as we talked about before. And this next piece here, we get to race prep, is where we start to take that normal level that kind of clocks in here at this first bar, if we will. It'll just kind of say like, hey, I'm just kind of sitting in this space here leading up to it. And then moving forward, we're going to go up. We're going to say, all right, here we go. We're going to bring up, we're going to raise the roof across these 4 weeks, start to challenge ourselves a little bit more work week by week, and then finish a bigger day. So you're kind of earning that bigger day and making that bigger day count by stacking it on these increasing weeks as we go forward, which I think is an important distinction. Right? And then finally, we have our race preparation here and our race simulations. These are important. Now, this kind of is a 12-week block, so you understand. And generally across a race prep season, if it's 12 weeks for a triathlon, sometimes we'll have 16 weeks for a marathon, or even longer for an ultra run. So it depends on the sport and how long you need to get ready. But in this case, this is someone who's preparing for a half or full Ironman. And you can see how the work builds. We build in some recovery, which really kind of tags back to this prior week. And then we build up again. We'll kind of sustain that for a little bit longer this time, and then we taper down. The important, elements that we can kind of note here are kind of this block here. We sort of have 3 weeks, almost 4 weeks at this level. This is where the magic happens. Everybody focuses on these 2 weeks and says, these are the workouts. I got to nail these workouts. But really, these are the workouts that we do that create the stress. And these workouts, so they get all the attention, but they really are only possible by doing this work. And doing this work is what not only prepares us for that level, but also consolidates it as well, especially here in this later phase. So really important to kind of understand that the volume matters. And in a course of a season, we'll have some high put out stuff like some race simulations here and here. We'll have some bigger training time as well. But overall, it's all built into the plan. And so race prep is the plan that you want to modify the least, because it's already got a lot of stuff baked into it. But we'll get more to that in a second. So the reason why I want to bring up allocation of this volume and intensity across the season is because of this lens here, this razor, this thought process, right? Something for you to carry away. Most of you have heard of Malcolm Gladwell, who popularized the concept from research that someone else had done that talked about how 10,000 hours of deliberate practice is required to be excellent at anything. If you want to be excellent at juggling, 10,000 hours of juggling will make you an elite juggler. And the concept was basically people spend time, or successful people spend time doing this work. And the sort of inverse quotient of that is, well, people spend a lot of time getting ready to be good at something. So only the good ones make it. That doesn't mean that there were a lot of people who did that approach from time and didn't make it, failed miserably. 10 hours in and of itself is not a guarantee for awesomeness. Even in this case, you look at it and say, oh my God, 10,000 hours, right? Well, let's do that across, how much is that like across a triathlon year, right? If an average triathlon year is 500 hours, which is 10 hours a week, which is a fair amount of training for a week. So we'll just say, 500 hours is a year. Well, in that case, to get to 10,000 hours, we have to do 20 years. 20 years of triathlon to get there. And I'm pretty much on my 20th year right now. And I'll tell you, yikes, I can't believe it went that fast, but holy cow, it's a lot of work. I don't want you to do that whole thing and wait 20 years. Instead, I'll tell you, hey, you know what? 10,000 hours is one way to do it. But if we did 1,000 uncomfortable hours, 1,000 hours where we really challenge ourselves, that's actually worth more than those 10,000 easy hours of training. And that's because the volume in our world is not just a training tool with sort of training and response and creating the stress that allows us to adapt and get stronger, but there's also a lot of lessons we learned about equipment, about our pacing, about our nutrition, about mental toughness. All of those pieces and more combine from these uncomfortable situations, which are often, don't be freaked out, associated with volume, because volume makes things more challenging, right? So that 1K uncomfortable hours, something to think about here as you start working in some of this intensity in your season. Now, as you start thinking about building out your season, I want you to be cautious. I'll give you some guardrails here. Always start smaller than you think. Start by stacking days and not hours. So rather than saying, I'll do 10 hours this weekend, let's do 2 days with 5 hours each, right? Let's stack days, not hours, and we'll get the time that we want out of it. And then finally, only really do one epic session a season. You'll see people doing epic stuff all the time. Someone will Everest or virtual Everest, and you say, I want to do that. That's great. I'll do it here, even though it's 8 weeks out from my Ironman. That's a lot of work to do those epic sessions. We want to plan accordingly. In fact, sometimes these epic sessions really need to be treated like a race. So we're not only prepared to do them, but we have time to recover from them, capture our lessons learned, and then use that moving forward. The reason I give you these guidelines is because it takes me back to when I was first a triathlete, way back in the day. I had a blue Cannondale, the stiffest frame in the world. I can't believe my fillings stayed inside my mouth. Yellow writing, black bar tape. Didn't go with the yellow bar tape. Black saddle, and rocking and rolling. And back then, I gave myself a challenge during like a holiday week. I was in grad school, and was like, okay, I'm going to do this volume thing, and I'm going to do 5 hours a day. Seems simple, right? Hour swim every day in the morning, get up early, swim, 3 hours on the bike, not hard, but just do 3 hours on the bike, and then run an hour. I said to myself, look, I'm in school. I don't have any other commitments because I'm on holiday. I got access to this pool, which is just 10 minutes away on a bike across campus. I've got a cafeteria with unlimited food. Weather should be good. I didn't have a trainer at the time, but weather should be good. Let's do this. Let's get out there and do this thing. I made it to day 2. By the end of day 2, I'd done 10 hours of training, which was a little bit less than what I've been doing on a weekly basis. I had 3 more days staring myself in the face, and I was exhausted and I was in pain. And the reason why I made that mistake is kind of the reason why I'm guardrailing you against doing it yourself, is that I just set a first level goal that was just way ambitious. It's simple, right? But simple doesn't mean easy. 5 days, 1 hour, 3 hours, 1 hour. That's simple. We get it. I can fit that square block in that square hole. Yes, sir, I'm good. The problem is it didn't account for where I was starting from. So if I did it a little bit easier and I started smaller than I thought I could do, I would have been much happier. If I'd done it for 3 days, if I'd set to myself as 3 days, I might have paced those first 2 days differently. And if I'd done 2 days and was in a tough spot, I only had 1 more day. I might have done it, right? In this case, the 5 days is way too much. The goal wasn't going to work, and I had to adopt things back just to be healthy moving forward. So start smaller than you think. If it was too easy, we can always add more. Easy to add more. Can't take away training hours that you've done, right? Similarly, stack days, not hours. Get creative. I was kind of close to this one, but think about it yourself. Do 2 or 3 days to get a lot of work in. Rather than doing back-to-back 100 miles days, which is 200 miles, could you do 3 days of like 65 miles? That's pretty much the same in terms of total distance. It's a little bit more spread out. With the the 3 days of 65 miles, you could be done, when the family's done with breakfast. If you were really kind of busting a move, that's not so bad on a weekend. That's not so costly, right? You could do that, or take a half day from work and get it done. That's not so bad. You can do that. So stacking days and hours as you get started with this whole process. And then ultimately, remember that 1 epic session a season. I'm sort of standing on both sides of the line on this one, because I do want you to go big. For me, it's usually a 10-hour bike ride. My tri bike, I go out, I'll roll 200 miles. I'm Rhode Island is flats, and I'm on my tri bike, which is cheating, but I'll go out and ride. I think this past year I did road bike instead, and I ended up doing like 160 miles, or 138 or 140 miles, whatever it was. I mapped it out. So a little different on a road bike, but the total training time was the same, which is what we're looking for. That was like a 10-hour day in the saddle to kind of just add up that volume and endurance for me and keep me going. So one of those sessions a year makes a big difference. So do challenge yourself, but it's easy to get carried away. You put that up on your Strava feed, your run, your ride, whatever you did, all of them together, and everyone's going to give you kudos and you get all this love. And when are you going to do that again? And it's going to sort of slowly be sort of cementing some neural pathways and say, I got to go big to get love. Don't have to do that, right? Just 1 epic session this season, because we still want it to count for your year. And don't forget, in a race prep season, we've got other volume baked in. I don't need you to do more volume. I got it baked into the season, right? Okay. Last piece here, last slide that I wanted to wrap up with was just helping you understand a little bit more about the impact of volume across a season, right? So let me go back up to this chart here. Sorry, it's so far away. There it is. This is our distribution of effort from power, similar with cycling or running or whatever, which is that we do harder, faster work in the winter. There's a broader spectrum of work that we do when we think about it from this curve, but it's only 14 weeks of the year. But during that time, our volume is low, time is low, recovery is high, right? Awesome. We move mid-season and later season. As we go through the course of this season and we think about our power distribution, it's important to note how things play out, right? Okay. So when we come back here, I just say, early on, when we're doing all that low grade time, but high intensity, injecting a 4-hour, 5-hour bike ride, which is not your longest ride of the year if you're going to be doing bike stuff. You're going to go much longer later in the year. But for you who've been doing 2.5 hours, 4 or 4.5 hour ride. It's a lot of time. It's a lot of time on the bike. It's taking your longest ride that you sort of know from a relative perspective, doubling it. That's like, wow, that's a lot of riding. It's gonna be mentally really, really tough. That workout has more impact on your fitness than later workouts do, right? Because those early workouts set the tone, raise the bar for our training stresses. We're building that chronic training load across the course of the season. This one has a big bump on it. Later in the year, when you've got lots of training stress in your system, the volume's relatively high, to do an individual workout that stands out so much, it really brings all of your metrics up, is hard. You got to go big, 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 right? Because that's what that big, big epic session season is for. Because otherwise, it's not going to move the needle on these numbers. You're not going to change it. So early season volume stuff does matter. And it doesn't have to be that big. It just has to be bigger than what you're doing now. That's why these test and rest weeks inside our out-season program, those of you who do it, are really important. They kind of really increase your training stress in a very focused way and still allow you to be successful at raising the numbers across the early part of your intensity metrics, right? Okay. Mid-season, that volume, again, the numbers don't go so big unless you go really, really big. This is where things get a little more mental, which I really like to think about. Things get tougher because you're going to have to do, if you're doing a 4-hour ride as your long ride, you might do a 6-hour ride in kind of that mid-season, or maybe you go really big up to 10 hours. I have no idea what you're going to do. And this is all hypothetical. Runners could, walk, run, walk. You could hike, power hike, go hilly. You could do lots of different stuff to make things challenging, whatever you wanted to do. The mid-season part is really that mental part where you're doing some of your longest sessions, but you don't have all the volume in your system yet. So it's a stretch challenge for you. But you can do them because you don't have the fatigue from the year in your body yet, and you're far enough away from race prep that you're not going to do damage. If you overreach in that 10-hour bike ride, I just keep saying it, but whatever you do is big. Then you got some time to figure it out, because you're not like, well, sorry, I know I'm exhausted, but tomorrow I got to run 3 hours, or tomorrow I got to get in the pool and swim 5K, or whatever the other numbers are. That would be too much stress in your system and would cause a breakdown, which we're totally trying to avoid. And then we get into race prep, as you saw from the chart before, then that stuff is very different. Volume at that point in time becomes very race specific, right? So it'd be positional fitness, nutritional fitness, pacing numbers. That's why we start doing race simulation workouts at this time, or intermediate level distance races. So a half Ironman could prepare you for an Ironman, or in a half marathon could prepare you for a marathon as another intermediary tool. But the point being that as we get into that race prep period, we want as much of our stuff to be focused on what we're going to do on race day as possible. So just random intermittent volume is not really the point here at the end. At the end, when you get into race prep, those last 12 weeks, we want to be as specific and deliberate as possible. This is where we do our race simulation events, where we'll have you, swim, bike, run if you're a triathlete. We'll have you, run and do the different paces if you're a runner. If you're doing ultra, we'll do, and it's an overnight, we'll figure out some kind of overnight version for you to challenge yourself that's safe. So all of that comes in, and this is more around the logistics side, because at the end of the day, race day is about execution and not fitness. So we want to make sure that you've got that execution piece dialed in. Volume is still important. We want to keep the training stress high, keep those adaptations that we've ramped up early in the season and kept going all year. We want to keep them going as long as we can before we taper, so we have that cumulative effect that's going to guide you through. But really, in race prep, the goal is not just to add volume for volume's sake or add more training stress, unless you're really behind, which may be the case. Instead, what it's really about is dialing in that race specificity. If you're gonna do a 3-hour, half Ironman bike ride, I want you to be able to do that bike ride not when you're fresh. Anybody can do it fresh. I want you to do it when you're tired. So I do need some training time, duration, and intensity with these race simulation workouts and back-to-back workout days, depending on the level of your plan, so that you're challenged appropriately. So we know you can ride that 3-hour bike after a bike that you're already tired. When we do our race camps for Ironman, for example, I have you ride 6 hours or 112 miles on the first day, and then we have you ride 6 hours or 112 miles on the second day. People say, what are we doing today, coach? And I'm like, we're gonna do just what we did yesterday. Except yesterday you got to use your legs, and today we're gonna use your head, right? Is it possible? Totally. Do people go faster the second day? Conditions normalized? Actually, some do. Because they found that early on they were powering through it and they were going easy when they didn't need to go easy. They're going too hard when it didn't matter. Well, now when you show up that second day and you're exhausted, you can still ride the same ride, but we do the effort entirely differently, because now we approach it differently. And the big lesson learned and takeaway for athletes at that point in time is, oh my God, I just did my biggest session of the day yesterday, and I had food and I had some pizza or whatever. I had a couple of beverages, rested, hydrated, foam rolled, Normatec, let's go, caffeinated, got back out there. and I did it again. Like I did my biggest session, so challenging, thought I was done, wanted to be done, and I went out the next day and I did it again. And I did it with fatigue in my system. Huge confidence builder, right? That's ultimately what we're looking for from that race prep type volume. So it's not something that we want to, put you in there and kind of break you or challenge you to the point where you won't be able to recover in time for the race. All right. So to recap for you guys in general, intermittent volume is an opportunity to space out work across your season in incremental ways that's normally baked into most of your training plans already as endurance nation athletes, that allows you to raise your training volume overall, to do so in an incremental manner, and to complement the work that you're doing in the regular week, and set the stage for you to be successful and continue to manage your schedule in a way that fits your life and achieve your goals, right? Awesome. I hope you enjoyed the presentation. I enjoyed giving it for sure. If you've got questions or comments, don't hesitate to reach out and ask me anytime. I'm happy to go through it. Otherwise, happy volume planning. I look forward to seeing the ideas that you guys come up with, and giving you some advice. And then more importantly, seeing the fitness and the outcomes. Take care, everyone. Have a good night.